This is the CBS Sunday Night News. Bill Plante reporting. Good evening. President Bush heads into another week of hectic activity designed to signal that, despite some similarities, this White House is in different hands after 8 years. But as Ron Allen tells us, there were a few things that didn't go according to the script.
While President Bush spent the day nursing a cold in the White House, his aides were busy assessing the administration's first week and planning for the next.
The president was the star of the week, as it should be, and he'll continue to be the star of the week.
But the president was upstaged by talk of a proposal to help bail out the savings and loan industry that would charge bank and thrift depositors an additional fee. When critics cried tax, the administration labeled it just a trial balloon.
And that trial balloon and putting a tax on savings was really very foolish. Obviously, it was shot down immediately.
But the administration has not given up the idea completely as it searches for a solution to the mounting $70 billion savings and loan crisis.
There are about 5 or 6 possibilities in the package that are being examined now.
The bottom line is that the industry cannot solve the problem by itself.
No question what the taxpayer is going to pick up part of it, and that's most unfortunate.
President Bush has a somewhat hectic agenda this week. He'll make his first trip on Tuesday to speak to the crew aboard ship at a U.S. naval base in Norfolk, Virginia. On Thursday, Japan's prime minister visits the White House. But the savings and loan crisis and the entire budget dilemma will occupy center stage and provide the measure of how the new president is doing. Ron Allen, CBS News, the White House.
The new vice president, who leaves this week for Venezuela and El Salvador, has canceled plans for a second Air Force plane to carry most of the reporters. Mr. Quayle's spokesman said the vice president decided it wouldn't look good to the taxpayers, even though news organizations pay the freight. His press secretary says Mr. Quayle is not concerned about intensive media coverage of his first major assignment. President Bush will be on the road soon, too, but as Bruce Dunning reports, not everyone has put out the welcome mat.
They can't spell President Bush's name, but radical Korean students vow to disrupt the Bush visit here next month. They link the American president to Korea's President Roh and his government, the government they want to overthrow. Students and labor unions rallied in Seoul's University District. The authorities were determined to keep them bottled up there. Policemen stood shoulder to shoulder, and try as they might, the ralliers couldn't break through. So out came the rocks and the fire bombs. For the first time since last summer's pre-Olympic violence, police used tear gas trucks, and the firebomb hurlers targeted them each time they moved. The students repeatedly demand that the U.S. troops be expelled from Korea, claiming the American presence here is blocking efforts to reunite South and North Korea. They battled for nearly an hour. Police collared a few demonstrators. One lucky student managed to argue his way out of arrest, then raced to join his fleeing friends. They'll be back in the streets denouncing President Bush's visit, but they have very little public support. They are not likely to have any effect at all on the presidential plans. Bruce Dunning, CBS News, Seoul.
Still ahead on the CBS Sunday Night News, arms to the Ayatollah, cash to the Contras, and now the Colonel to the courtroom. The Kremlin is about to take some of the free out of free enterprise, what there is of it anyway, in the communist world. Bert Quint in Warsaw reports.
Life will get a little harder for East Bloc gray marketeers this week when the Soviet Union imposes new controls aimed at restricting the export of scarce consumer goods. Television sets, refrigerators, washing machines, and other products made in the USSR have been taken away by the carload by tourists from other socialist lands, as well as by Russians who sell them at markets like this one at Białystok, across the border in Poland. These same Russians and others buy up whatever is available here that's short at home, especially clothing, meat, and vegetables. The same thing goes on in markets throughout the East Bloc. The Poles are among the most enterprising. They make trips all over the world and finance them, even make a profit, by filling their suitcases with goods for resale. Today, for example, at this Warsaw market, besides Western electronic goods and clothing, there were East German sausages on sale, Russian binoculars, and as one awe-struck Polish visitor put it, everything you could ever want if you could only afford the crazy prices. But Poles don't like seeing foreigners, even their socialist brothers, buying their food and consumer goods. And for the governments of all these countries, it hurts to see these scarce products being sold, not for the hard currency they need, but for the soft currencies of their neighbors. Bert Quint, CBS News, Warsaw.
The Soviet foreign minister is going to China this week. As Barry Peterson reports, it's the latest step toward ending years of animosity between the world's two largest communist nations.
The Soviet people have been softened up for coming better relations with this old enemy. Soviet television programs now show China travelogue style. Nice people, the programs are quick to point out. Nice place to visit. But Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze may get little sightseeing on his visit. He is smoothing the way for a Sino-Soviet summit, probably in Beijing, probably this spring. Old foes becoming new friends in a big way. Easing tensions would let Moscow pull back some of the 50,000 Soviet troops along the Chinese border. And both sides could look forward to more trade. Next on Shevardnadze's itinerary, the war in Afghanistan. The Soviet foreign minister is expected for talks in Pakistan. Soviet sources refuse to say if he will meet with Mujahideen guerrillas, who have vowed to overthrow by force the Soviet-backed regime once Soviet troops leave in the next few weeks.
Moscow continues to hope that even at this late hour, it may still strike a political deal with the Mujahideen on a coalition government. If not, Soviet troops may leave behind chaos and political upheaval as their legacy from almost a decade of bloodshed. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
A week after the execution of Ted Bundy in Florida, another alleged serial killer is going on trial tomorrow in Los Angeles. David Dow has the story.
We're happy to announce that the individual we have in custody is Richard Ramirez, the Nightstalker.
It has taken nearly 3.5 years since that day, since his capture by an angry mob, to bring Richard Ramirez to trial. Ramirez, a 28-year-old drifter, says he's innocent of 13 murders and 30 other felonies he's charged with. Crimes that struck fear in the general public, like few other violent sprees in Southern California history.
Make sure your windows and your doors are securely locked.
Despite such warnings, it seemed as though no neighborhood was immune from the random attacks by the Nightstalker, the sadistic killer who slipped through open windows and struck at night. Gun sales soared as the death toll, headlines, and anxieties all mounted.
I will not leave my windows and doors open anymore. It's frightening.
By the time Ramirez was arrested, the Nightstalker's bloody rampage had spread to 3 counties. Through 3 years of legal skirmishing and 6 months of jury selection, defense attorneys have revealed little about their intended strategy. Hundreds of witnesses are expected to appear in a trial that could take more than a year and end in a death sentence if Ramirez is convicted. David Dow, CBS News, Los Angeles.
In an interview out tonight, Nicaraguan President Ortega says that he wants better relations with the United States. Ortega told Time magazine he's ready to make big cuts in his armed forces if that's what it takes. Months of legal maneuvering have now come to an end, and Ronald Reagan has left Washington without pardoning him, which means that Oliver North goes to trial Tuesday morning. When soldier of fortune Eugene Hasenfuss survived the crash of a plane supplying the Contra rebels and was captured by the Sandinistas in October 1986, there was no hint that the Reagan administration was headed for one of its most serious crises. It wasn't until the next month that Attorney General Meese outlined an elaborate scheme to use profits from the secret sale of arms to Iran to aid the Contras. The architect of that plan, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, a mid-level official on the National Security Council, spent 6 days telling his story to Congress and the American public, with such effect that many, including the president, called him a national hero. But Mr. Reagan spent the rest of his presidency in the uncomfortable position of insisting that he hadn't known about the proposed diversion of arms profits to the Contras. And North wound up being indicted by independent prosecutor Lawrence Walsh. Because the Reagan administration refused to allow use of most of the secret documents North wanted for his defense, Walsh was forced to drop his two main charges, conspiracy to defraud the government and theft. But 12 other charges, including lying to Congress and accepting gratuities, remain. And legal experts familiar with the case say those charges, while less significant politically, may be more difficult for North to disprove.
He could much more easily argue that it's appropriate to bend the law when what you're doing is saving lives and protecting our country from communism. Much more difficult to raise that type of a defense to a charge that you lied to Congress.
Oliver North left the Marine Corps almost a year ago. He has spent his time on the lecture circuit and preparing for this trial, which could take months. That's the news. I'm Bill Plante, CBS News, New York. See you next Sunday night. Good night.
I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, the lack of winter snow, it could mean drought and water shortages this summer. Also, Martin Short will join us on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.